Athletes, what is going on, guys? Back at you for another episode. Dropping some bombs, dropping some knowledge, sharing the tactics and the wisdom with you so we can take you to that next level. In today's episode, this is an important one. I always say they're important. I choose important stuff to discuss, is vascular health, the real driver around longevity and performance. I know that doesn't necessarily sound sexy, vascular health, but wait till you hear what I'm going to share with you. Because most people have no clue that their heart and their vascular system is like an interconnected bunch of highways and interstates. And if you can maximize blood flow and oxygen transportation, you get everything shuttled to your cells at a higher, more proficient level. And what do you think that means for energy levels? What do you think that means for your brain function? More oxygen to your brain. What do you think that means for recovery? Or being able to train and perform at a high level because you've got all that nutrients running into your muscles while you train. So you've got to be thinking about and always tying this back to the ROI of being that business athlete. You see, most guys, especially guys, as we come into our 40s, 50s, and onward, they usually get a lot of what's called blood viscosity, thick blood. Think of it like molasses. And the thicker your blood is, the higher your blood pressure goes, and obviously that puts a tremendous strain on your pump. Think about it. If you have if your pump has to force molasses through your circulatory system, it's got to pump really hard to move that blood. So it's not only working really hard, which is an energy drain, but it's not even getting that nutrients and that energy shuttled around your system as fast as it could. And so not only is your body working harder, you're not even getting a benefit from that hard work. So I want to discuss this and give you guys some clean tactics and tools that you can use. And I will say this is important for men and women, especially I would say for the ladies. Once women go through menopause, if they don't dial in their hormones and lock their estrogen in well, that really can drive up potential heart complications, like a lot of atherosclerosis and endothelial lining damage can happen because estrogen is very cardiovascular protective. So I'm going to be talking about the negative effects of testosterone replacement therapy on men as it relates to heart health. This is a big one because a lot of guys are on this and most of them don't know this. And I'm going to be talking all about blood pressure management and just how to optimize your system. Obviously, I will say straight out of the gate, blood pressure and blood thickness is probably one of the most important things from just a life and death standpoint, because it's not like cancer or something where you can often see warning signs and it's a progression. When your system is very inflamed and it's pumping molasses and it's very strained, you might have no obvious issues and then one day it's over. And there are people that we know that are like that have, haven't had any substantial issues, and then they just have that heart attack and it's the first one, it's the only one, and they're gone. And so I absolutely want you guys to listen to this, not only for your own benefit, but I know you will have people in your life that would probably need to hear this. So I want you to listen to this, and then I want you to share this with the people that you feel need to hear this, because it's very important. We can talk hormones and peptides and stuff all day long, but this is what literally is going to be the stuff that keeps you alive. So today's episode, I'm talking about how to keep you alive long term. But not only that, how do you actually perform at a high level? It's one thing to just be living but not thriving. My whole message is how can we increase our health span? Health span over lifespan, because that way you're living very, very high quality years. So we're going to be touching on, fitness and fitness tools as it relates to cardiovascular health, what it is and what it isn't. We're going to be talking about the heart, but also the vascular system, how it affects brain concentration, ADHD, the endothelial lining, and just like your vascular system in general. And we'll be discussing things around cholesterol confusion, This is a big one for people, so we'll be talking about HDL and LDL, but specifically ApoB and AP-a. If you don't get your ApoB run, that's a big issue, and that's one thing. If you took one thing from this podcast, it's ApoB. You must run it because that is the highly atherogenic small particle LDL that's like sandpaper on the inside of your vascular system, just inflaming the heck out of you. And remember what I say, when you have inflammation through your body, that inflammation is not just localized to your heart or vascular system, it's typically systemic. So what do you think inflammation in your brain looks like? It looks like mental health issues. It looks like anxiety. It looks like low mood. It looks like an inability to concentrate, ADHD. What do you think, essentially, what do you think inflammation is in general? It's a form of aging. So if you want to age faster and you want to be 40 and look like you're 60, then keep doing what you're doing. If you want to reverse aging and look freaking youthful, and be youthful and be biologically younger, tune into this. So we'll be discussing that. We'll also be talking about inflammation and heart risk as it relates to high sensitivity C-reactive protein. So HSCRP. I would say that HSCRP is like the canary in the coal mine marker for how likely someone is to have a heart attack or stroke. Really, really important marker to know. We'll be discussing things like homocysteine, uric acid. This is some good stuff, guys. And like I said, always be tying it back to tools, VO2 max, zone 2 cardio, things you can do that will help you with this stuff. So the first thing that I'll say is that I think for most people, it's worth getting an at-home blood pressure monitor, especially for the men. What I've found in general is that a lot of these high achievers, professionals, business owner types, a lot of you guys listening, you are typically all gas and no brakes. You're sort of acetylcholine dominant, GABA deficient, so you can tend towards that sort of manic end of the spectrum where you're go, putting out fires, hustle and grind, and it's very clear that edge that helps you get good results when it comes to some of your business stuff is also the potential downfall when it comes to your health. So we have to find a way to toggle that switch and manage this system well. Because if you're very, very strained with your nervous system, so in the previous episode 15, I talked about sympathetic nervous system dominance and that chronic stress drives up sympathetic nervous system dominance. And so go listen to that episode because anyone who faces any degree of stress on a daily basis absolutely needs to hear that, because you can be eating a lot of the healthy foods and you can be cleaning up the diet and taking some of the supplements. But if your nervous system's out of control and you're just super strained and it's driving up your blood pressure, that's not good. That's not good. So we'll definitely be talking about how to solve for this stuff. So I'm of the notion that I do think there is a genetic underpinning when it comes to cardiovascular health, but I absolutely believe that our lifestyle and our environment and our perception basically pulls the trigger. So think of genetics as a loaded gun, but your behavior, your environment, your diet choices, and your stress management tools essentially pull the trigger. Now, if you do the right things, that gun just sits there and it absolutely does nothing. Yet you do the wrong things and it's a very dangerous weapon. And so you've got to understand that genetics, a lot of primary care physicians will blame a lot of things on genetics and make you feel like you're powerless to change. I really dislike that perspective. And I will tell you, I've seen firsthand massive miraculous changes in people, in their blood work, in heart scans, in testing, across the board. And so whenever someone says that to you, you've just got to choose to be like, you know what, that's someone else's story, that's someone else's narrative. I'm not going to subscribe to that. So the first thing that I would say is it's good to get at-home blood pressure monitoring just to basically know what is going on. Where are you at? It's a good leading indicator of how thick your blood is. Now, I know a lot of men, they won't take this because it's almost like an ostrich with its head in the sand. But what I will tell you is the pros, the business athletes, they're the ones that just play this preventative game, this proactive, prophylactic game. Prophylactic meaning you want to be ahead of the curve. You want to anticipate what's coming so you can pivot and master anything that comes your way. And so always think, I'm playing a prophylactic game. And I will also say to you this. You've got to remember that if anything was to happen to you, what's going to happen with your family? Your kid's going to grow up without a father or a mother. What's going to happen to your partner? They're going to be all alone to navigate life without you. So I tell, for a lot of guys, and I'll say this, if you're a guy and you're pushing the limits in business because you want to be a hustler, and maybe you're using a bunch of anabolic steroids because you want to be jacked, and you're just pushing the limits, you've got to realize that is very selfish behavior. It's incredibly selfish, because if anything was to happen to you, your kids will be fatherless or motherless. And so I'm speaking to some of you guys, very, very selfish, and you need to pull your head out of your butt and remind yourself that you need to embody what it means to be a better leader. And I would actually tell you that people do a lot of goofy stuff in the health and fitness space, and a lot of it doesn't even result in good results. They don't even look good. So you're doing a bunch of stuff that's not even netting you a positive result. Talk about like lack of ROI. So definitely remind yourself why you do this. I look at my daughter Zia, I look at my son Xander, I look at my wife Lauren, and I remind myself this is why I have to look after myself. It's why I have to put my oxygen mask on first. It's why I have to keep my axe sharp. And it's why I must set boundaries with people. Because all of that stuff is going to impact stress on your nervous system. And that has a huge effect on your heart health. So heart health is not just a dietary thing. It's not just a genetic thing. There's a psychological stress component to this around systems and managing boundaries with people. So you do need to recognize that that is also an issue. Now, the other thing that I would say is worth getting done is some comprehensive blood work done. Now, one of the earlier episodes that I've done is on detailed blood work. Go and listen to that, because I dive into all the mechanics of the different things that you should run. I talk about it like puzzle pieces that most labs, most primary care physicians, when they run your blood work, especially through insurance, they'll just run some minimalistic bullcrap. It's useless, to be honest. It'd be like having a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and they give you 100 pieces and tell you to put the puzzle together and tell them what the image is. At that point, it's so inconclusive, you probably can't even tell, because there's 900 pieces missing. Getting detailed blood analysis done fills all those little gaps. You get a much more accurate view of what's happening. And so, for example, a lot of these insurance-based panels and just your typical blood work, they won't run ApoB. They won't run C-reactive protein. They won't run homocysteine or uric acid. They'll run HDL cholesterol and LDL. That's it. They just run the basics. And those basics are very inconclusive. And I'm going to explain why. So you want to get comprehensive, complete labs run, because in that way you actually have data. I want to know, where is your ApoB levels at? Where's your AP(a) levels at? Where is your C-reactive protein or your HS-CRP? What's happening with your uric acid levels? Where is your homocysteine at? Even things like a gut marker like TMAO. TMAO is a marker of inflammation in the gut that has a massive effect on heart health. And I would say that in many ways, metabolic syndrome, which is very common, is also a big issue. And I actually did an episode on insulin sensitivity, and I tied it into metabolic syndrome, where if you have high hemoglobin A1C, HbA1c, and you have high glucose levels and high insulin, coupled with high triglycerides and high LDL cholesterol, that's basically metabolic syndrome. So what that means in simple terms is you have a ton of inflammation in your system, and that's aging you faster. Think of inflammation in your system a bit like you as a drag car, and you're racing down that strip but your parachute is half ejected the whole time. You know how the parachute pops out at the very end to slow the vehicle down? But it doesn't pop out till the race is done. So they're hitting like max speed. That's what you can be like when your body's optimized. But when you are inflamed, it's like you're racing down the strip with your foot down, but your parachute's already half ejected. So you have a ton of friction, a ton of drag that is slowing you down. So that lethargy, that tiredness, that lack of energy, that lack of mental clarity that you feel, that is like metabolic drag on your system caused by inflammation, things like metabolic syndrome, driven by the heart health stuff. So it's all connected. It's all connected. So I think to myself, even if, say, you were like, oh, man, I don't really, whatever, the heart health stuff, like, this is a boring topic. I would say, well, how productive do you want to be on a day-to-day basis in terms of your energy and output? Do you find that you start kind of burning out at certain points in the day? Do you feel like the gas in the tank gets drained? Do you need to take naps? Or do you feel like you need to keep popping stimulants to keep going? And then you just start feeling like fried. Because if you lock this stuff in, you can improve all of those things. And you can sustain them long term. So it's definitely a tactical ROI when it comes to producing at a higher level. Now, blood work, like I mentioned, go back and listen to that episode on blood work to get more information on all the different markers. But I would say those ones that those blood markers I just mentioned are a good place to begin. Now, a couple of things here. One, you can train and do a lot of physical activity and still have poor cardiovascular health. So just because you're working out and lifting weights and doing some cardio doesn't in and of itself mean that your heart and vascular system are healthy. And the same thing is true if you just focus on your diet. So if you're just focusing on some supplements or the dietary component, but you're sedentary, you're sitting on your butt all day, you're not up walking, that's equally going to have a negative effect. So you've got to realize that optimal vascular health is a combination of movement, dietary stuff, supplementation, sleep, and stress mitigation techniques. And if you were to take key principles from each of those buckets and apply, amazing, amazing results. So that's what we're going to essentially walk through. We're going to walk through different tactics to kind of give you some clarity around, okay, when you leave this episode, what do you do? Especially if you have high cholesterol and your doctor is either or wants to put you on statins, PCSK9 inhibitors, some type of like cholesterol lowering drug. This is absolutely for you. So either cholesterol lowering or blood pressure medication. Frame of reference, I've had amazing students that have been on blood pressure medications for 20, 30 years, and they came to me and we ran some of these protocols, and they are off those medications for the first time in 30 years. And talk about like taking matters into your own hands, and talk about not subscribing to the notion that, oh, it's just genetic. Yeah, tell that to the guy that got off the medications after 30 years, right? So the first thing, let's dive into some of the cholesterol stuff real quick, because I think this is a point of confusion for a lot of people. There are so many debates online when it comes to nutrition around cholesterol. You have some people saying cholesterol is really important because it's like a primary molecule that then converts down into testosterone. It's like the sort of governing molecule that helps with hormone precursors. So that's one argument, right? So they say, oh, don't worry about LDL. It's the ratio. It's the ratio that matters. So some people say it doesn't even matter at all, and that it should be high. Some people say it's the ratio that matters. So even if LDL is high, it doesn't matter, because as long as your HDL is good, the ratio. And then other people say, no, you need to get specifically your ApoB down. The range is typically around 100, but I think optimally you want to be about 80. And that is what really helps increase vascular healing and improvement in cardiovascular outcomes. And I will say that a lot of the heart doctors, a lot of the cardiovascular surgeons, they seem to encourage that last perspective. But I will say there is nuance here. There is nuance. So I would definitely say that the ratio is important, which is why you want to do things to get your HDL cholesterol up. So for example, HDL cholesterol is going to be driven primarily by monounsaturated / omega-3 based fats. So that's also why I do a double serving of omega-3s every day. And it's why I would encourage you to weave in omega-3 rich foods into your macro bowls, into your diet on a daily basis. Because that is going to be one part of the equation that helps push up that HDL level, or that good cholesterol, so to speak. Now, another part of it, I would say, is as it relates to your ratio and ApoB. But before we touch on that, when it comes to testosterone replacement therapy, which I know a lot of people use, one of the common things that people are prescribed with is an estrogen blocker. It's called an aromatase inhibitor. And the whole intention is to inhibit aromatization, which is basically where your body converts estrogen. And the reason why we don't want to get a lot of estrogen conversion is because if too much of that is a female hormone, you'll start to get gynecomastia, which is like breast tissue. Now, they fearmonger and they scare a lot of guys into supplementing and medicating with this out of fear of not wanting to get breast tissue. But what I will tell you is that typically the dosing is too high and it's crushing their estrogen to zero, and that's not good for your HDL cholesterol levels. So what you'll often find is that if you don't titrate and adjust your TRT dosing accurately, which I collaborate with a lot of good doctors to help people with this as it relates to their diet, really fine-tuning their protocols. Because what you'll find is that as you block estrogen more and as estrogen decreases, that HDL level starts to tank. And that is that cardiovascular protective molecule that also helps with that ratio we talk about. Think about this too. That's also why women that are going through menopause or went through menopause and maybe didn't do any hormone replacement therapy, they have a real potential for heart complications. So generally what we want to try to do is, as a woman's going through menopause, is pull as many levers as you can to either try to naturally stimulate her estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone levels as much as possible, or using different adaptogens, different foods, or worst case scenario, some strategic bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. Because if that estrogen level tanks, obviously it affects your mood, your libido, everything. Your collagen production in your skin. It's why people's skin starts to get very thin and delicate as they age. But beyond that, it tanks HDL. And so that's, again, why testosterone replacement therapy gets a bad rap as it relates to heart health. Because it basically means that you don't have that good ratio that protects you. And that's just super important to know these things. So obviously the testosterone replacement therapy discussion is in another podcast. Go listen to that because I did touch on it in there too. And I even talked about the female hormones as well. So there's some good stuff to know in that region of the discussion. Now, what I would say that one of the key markers to know when it comes to all of this stuff is your ApoB, your small particle LDL. Think of that as the very atherogenic particle. Atherogenic just basically means it's very inflammatory. And I often try to explain it a bit like sandpaper on the inside of your vascular system. Imagine if you took some sandpaper to your skin and you were to just rub your skin with sandpaper, even if you don't rub it hard, but you just rub. The more you do that, it just starts to develop like a septic wound. And think about it, the more you rub, it gets to the point where it's like a totally open wound, sepsis infection. Even though you're just rubbing lightly, that's what long-term elevations in ApoB looks like. And so we really want to make sure that we are focusing on that. Generally speaking, they will say, I think from memory, 80 plus is, between 80 and 100 is a sort of a normal range. I see a lot of people over 100. I would say most people are over 100. They're between 100 and 120. I will tell you that getting between 70 and 80 is amazing. That's the sweet spot. That's the Goldilocks zone that you absolutely want to strive towards. Now, when it comes to your ApoB level, you're probably wondering, like, what is some of the primary drivers? Like, why is it high? One thing I want to tell you guys is this is where genetics plays a role. And this is one of the most important things of this podcast right now. So take notes here. The reason why diet advice can be so confusing, and you have some people say, high-fat diets, high cholesterol diets are fine for you. You have other people say, no, cholesterol in your food's terrible, and it's so confusing. And you have these specialists on both sides preaching completely polar opposite things. The reason why it's confusing is because of the genetic variability. Some people are very, very sensitive. They have what's called hyperlipidemia. I'm like that. And so you consume any high saturated fat foods or any sort of cholesterol-based foods, and it freaking drives up your ApoB like crazy. And I would even say processed refined carbohydrates do too. So processed refined carbohydrates and or a lot of saturated fat and or a lot of cholesterol in food. And that combination for someone with hyperlipidemia is like gasoline on a house fire. It just drives it through the frickin' roof. That's also why someone's doing like a carnivore-based diet with a lot of saturated fat and they have that genetic tendency to have hyperlipidemia, man, their levels go absolutely thermonuclear. It's not good. Then equally, you have some people that have like a real positive sensitivity to cholesterol. They metabolize it very well. I've seen people who consume multiple eggs per day with cholesterol, and they're consuming saturated fat, and like they're not getting any like adverse response when it comes to their cholesterol markers. It's not as common, but it can happen. And that, my friend, is why it's confusing, because people are not factoring in their unique blood work. You might have someone who just puts a blanket statement out there saying, oh no, you can consume sausage and bacon and all these things, it's fine. Well, has that person looked at your blood work? Do they have any idea how sensitive or reactive your lipid profiles are? Because if they haven't looked at your labs in detail, then it's just a blanket statement, and it's probably false. So this is where nuance is key. And so you'll often see me when I'm talking, and with my students, they often have different dietary processes they use. I've been plant-based for 13 years because it was arguably one of the most potent levers to pull for me personally to get my blood work really optimal. When I was in my 20s, my ApoB was high, my cholesterol was high, my fasting glucose levels and my HbA1c were high. Like, I was in shape. Get this. This is crazy. I was in physical shape. Like, I was probably 10% body fat. I wasn't in as good a condition as I am now, but I was, along the path, and I looked okay, but I felt like crap. It's that metabolic drag I talk about, right? So I felt tired all the time. I had to take naps every day. My skin wasn't very good, and I get sick all the time. Like, I get colds and flus, colds every month. It was crazy. And I'm thinking to myself, I look kind of like I'm in shape. And yet my physiology is saying the complete opposite to that. Now, when I got all my labs done and I could see all these markers were like high and abnormal, and then I adopted like a well-planned out plant-based diet, very strategic, it was like a night and day difference. 13 years on now, and all my labs are just dialed in perfectly. All my physiology dialed in perfectly. But again, I come back to this point. What worked for me may not be the ideal thing for you. But that's where, for example, getting in my business athlete council or getting some one-on-one coaching, we can determine what that looks like. Through blood testing, through food sensitivity testing, you can determine what that looks like. And that's super important. So never just take it on face value that a carnivore diet or a plant-based diet or this food or that food is good or bad for you based on what context. That's why people get confused. So I really wanted to drive that home because that's probably the biggest confusion point when it comes to diet and nutrition there is. And that's why there's a difference. You might be like, why, how can you have like physicians and specialists on both sides? Like, how does that even work? Because they're not factoring in context. The smart ones do, but not all of them are as intelligent as you think they are. So when it comes to ApoB, the first thing we want to do is we want to look at other markers in your system, AP(a). We want to look at some of the insulin sensitivity markers because like I said, if you have a bit of metabolic syndrome and your blood pressure's kind of high and you just in general, like you've got a lot of inflammation in your markers and your C-reactive protein is high, I would tell you that you're probably more sensitive to cholesterol and a lot of saturated fat and a lot of processed refined carbohydrates than you think. So in that case, adopting a more plant-predominant diet or a plant-based diet using monounsaturated, aka omega-3 based fats instead of saturated fat is a great idea. And then making sure that you're not consuming a lot of inflammatory refined carbohydrates. You're opting for whole food carbohydrates, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, like low glycemic index, whole carbohydrate foods. Spaghetti squash, butternut squash, zucchinis, Japanese sweet potato, gold potatoes, in the right context. So I say this because if you are consuming like a carnivore-based diet and it's a ton of saturated fat and you have a tendency to sort of snack or eat processed refined carbohydrates, which a lot of people do, I would tell, and obviously there's a lot of cholesterol-based foods in there, that will most likely drive up your ApoB through the roof if you're already sensitive. Now, one of the confusing points, people say, cholesterol in food doesn't affect cholesterol in the blood. Again, genetic variability. I've seen people who can consume multiple eggs per day and their lipids look fine. I've seen people, I did that and mine weren't. And I saw my real data that said that's not the case for me. So I say this because that's how we determine what foods should be in and out of your rotation. And that's so powerful because as soon as you start to reduce down all that inflammation in your system, you liberate all this stuck energy, and that's how you perform at a higher level. Your body burns fat more predominantly. You feel better. You have more of a flow state with your brain and your focus and your thinking. So it really comes back to optimizing how you perform as a business athlete. So I would say in general, ApoB, you are going to want to make sure that the fats in your diet are omega-3 based monounsaturated fats predominantly. Olives, olive oil, hemp seed, avocado, fatty cuts of fish, that type of stuff. You could probably even throw a little bit of tofu in there as well, that type of stuff. Those are going to be the good options. I wouldn't be cooking with things like coconut oil and butter and stuff. I'd be using a high-quality avocado oil for cooking. And if you want to do something in a salad or whatever, like without cooking, a good quality extra virgin olive oil, like the Blueprint one. So the omega-3 based fats are going to be good for HDL cholesterol and good for brain health. And they're not going to drive up that ApoB score. So I would say that's where you want to get your fats from. I would also say, again, finding healthy food upgrades for a lot of the refined carbohydrates you love. So certain types of bread, pastas, ice cream, stuff like that, you need to find what I call healthy food upgrades. I talk about healthy food upgrades a ton in my Anomaly Project course and in my Business Athlete Council group. Now, for example, you can use a Ninja Creamy or use a Vitamix blender and make banana nice cream. Instead of doing ice cream, which is just like a fatty, sugar-infused bomb, get some frozen ripe bananas, get a clean protein powder, throw it in there, add a little splash of water, and blend that, and you got like a soft serve ice cream. So that is way better for you from a inflammatory perspective than having a pint of Ben & Jerry's. And you can apply this notion to basically everything. So instead of eating white refined carbohydrate pasta, which again, that inflammation will have a negative effect on ApoB, you can opt for something like the Brahmi pasta, So brahmi is organic lentil flour turned into pasta. It's great, and it's higher in protein too. So you want to find replacements for all of those things. And I would say low glycemic index, whole food carbohydrates, not processed stuff. So typically think foods with one ingredient. Sweet potato is just sweet potato. Blueberries are just blueberries. And I would also aim to time your carbohydrate intake, ideally to push most of them into a post-workout window. I consume all my dark berries and fruit post-workout. Why? Because when you train, you empty your glycogen stores, and a way to top those back up so you can actually fuel training to build muscle is you want to get that glycogen push from good quality carbohydrates. And remember, things like blueberries, high in antioxidants. Things like purple potato, high in antioxidants. Antioxidants are basically like WD-40 for the cogs in your system. So a lot of this inflammation that you're accumulating is like rust, oxidative damage, oxidative stress. That's what rust is, oxidation. And so you're applying the WD-40 to clean out the system so the gears move smoothly and well. So foods are not just calories and they're not just carbohydrates. They come with a package deal. What does that package deal look like for you with all the antioxidants and polyphenols and stuff? Because that's going to be the stuff that slows down rates of aging a ton. So those things, I would say, are key things to focus on as it relates to ApoB. Really, really important. Now, there are some supplements that you can use. And by the way, those dietary suggestions that I just made, there are a couple more. And in fact, let me touch on them now quickly. But they will apply to most inflammation markers in the body. That's the beautiful thing about this, guys, is that it's not like you have to have 10 different solutions to solve 10 different problems. Very often, I'm always about ROI. So I want to pull 2 or 3 levers that fix like 8 to 10 problems. That's how you get a better result long term and sustain it. Because you're pulling such prolific levers that have a high ROI that 2 or 3 actions that you're doing result in like 80% of your outcome. That's how I don't burn out, basically. And it's the opposite of what most people do. They micromanage and they major in the minors. And so they're doing 10 different things to try and solve 10 problems, and the 10 things burn them out. And then they do no things. So I would say adding fibrous vegetables to each meal. Fiber is very good at binding up extra sticky cholesterol, the ApoB, the LDL. Now, you might say, well, my gut doesn't tolerate fiber very good. A lot of people who do carnivore diet, for example, say that. Well, you need to go through a gut rehab protocol. Rather than avoiding and ignoring the foods that actually are healthful for you, it's better that you try to rehab the issue in the first place. Now, I will say, there are some instances where if you have a food sensitivity, like that might not be an ideal food for you to consume. But I do think fiber across the board in all the research when it comes to cancers, colon cancer, heart health, you name it, tends to have a positive effect. So I would be telling you, go listen to my other episodes where I've talked about gut health, because if you can optimize your gut and get your gut working well, you can add in more fibrous foods, and that will be a game changer in terms of how your body can clean up some of this surplus LDL in your system. So fiber is a big one. Outside of that, I would say like my macro bowl concept I talk about is key. So I did a whole episode on macro bowls where I'm talking about lean proteins, low glycemic index carbohydrates, monounsaturated fats, like an omega-3 based fat approach, minimizing saturated fats as much as you can. Again, fat's not bad, but for people who have these genetic tendencies, it's like gas on the house fire. So it's almost better to just kind of err on the side of caution, because you're still going to get fat from the omega-3 based sources. So you're still, and typically that's even more healthful. So I say this because rather than guessing, it's better to be that proactive person. Now, what I would also say is outside of ApoB, your C-reactive protein is an important marker. It's kind of like the canary in the coal mine marker for how likely someone is to have a heart attack or stroke. So if you get your ApoB levels run, and typically the normal range is like 1 to 3, that to me is not good. Like if someone is 2+, that's not good. If someone's above 3, that's really not good. Really not good. So I want to see you below 1. They even say 1 is normal. To me, again, this is why when you go to the doctor and they say, oh no, everything's normal, but you don't feel good, that's why. Because normal ranges suck. Normal ranges do not constitute optimal. As a business athlete, we're here to optimize. We're here to optimize, so we want to get into that Goldilocks zone. I want you to get as close to 0 as possible. I'm like 0.2. And so I say this because when you have that very low level of inflammation in your body, what do you think that means for your brain chemistry and your mood, anxiety, ADHD? What do you think it means for your rates of aging? What do you think it means for just like how all your systems in your body? When you have less inflammation, everything works as it was intended. So I definitely think you need to know your HS-CRP score because that is a key, it's a leading indicator. Now, one of the good things is that a lot of the suggestions that I gave you around the dietary stuff just now, that also applies to this. So that's the good thing, is that some of these dietary principles are universal. They fix multiple things at once, which is why I talk about this stuff, because I want to pull those big ROI levers. Now, and I'm going to talk about some supplementation soon too. Now, homocysteine is another one. Homocysteine is almost like a marker of endothelial irritation. So think of endothelial lining as this thin cellular lining on all the outside of your arteries, capillaries, and veins. It's like a little sort of protective buffer. And what happens with that sandpaper effect of ApoB is it starts to rub holes in this endothelial lining, and that's what starts to cause that sort of plaque buildup, and everything just starts to de-optimize. Now, interesting thing with homocysteine is that it's typically connected with someone that might have issues with methylating B vitamins. You hear a lot about methylation issues, right? And you might need to use like a methylated B vitamin. What I would tell you is right out of the gate, first of all, if you get your homocysteine levels checked and they're high, more than likely you have issues with methylation. It's almost just better to just be proactive and play it safe and just use a methylated B vitamin to start with. You know, a lot of the B vitamins aren't methylated, and that's what can cause the issues. So if you just go to Amazon and search, best methylated B vitamin, just start some of that. That's a good place to begin because that methylation pathway, when it's optimized, will reduce a lot of that endothelial irritation. It's one of those things where it's not just about the heart. It's about the heart and all the little roadways that branch off the heart that have to deliver oxygen and nutrients to all your different cells in your body, right? So like it's the whole, it's a system as a whole. Now, another marker that is worth knowing is your uric acid levels. So think of uric acid. It's an inflammation marker that affects multiple systems in the body. It's typically connected to insulin resistance and blood pressure issues. And generally speaking, it's going to be like sort of that metabolic stress signal. So this one, uric acid, is a good one to know as it pertains to metabolic syndrome. And if it's left to magnify, that's what gout looks like. Gout, your swollen joints, your body just swells, especially your joints, ankles, hands. That's what gout is notorious for. And just think, again, like I always say, inflammation is metabolic drag. And so that inflammation is not just localized to your ankles and your wrists. That's going to be affecting your brain. It's going to be affecting your heart, everything. So if you're getting gout-like symptoms, that's an obvious biofeedback signal that something is not right. I would tell you right out of the gate, blood pressure, aches and pains of your joints, swelling in your arms and legs, all of those things, ringing in your ears, these are the things that you need to pay attention to because it's your body trying to communicate to you that something is not right. Now, I had a guy come to me once, and he was like a very successful business guy, but very highly strung and highly stressed. And his diet was not good. And he was one of those people, he didn't realize how bad his diet was. he thought it was okay, but it was terrible. Now, we got his diet cleaned up over time, but what I noticed was that his mental state, he was quite manic and it was like he was putting out fires all day, a very stressed guy. And I don't even think he realized how much stress he would just run as like a baseline. And he had, and even once he cleaned his diet up, because he was so stressed and just like operating like a hot mess, he had a lot of inflammation going on in his body. So I say this because, again, we're talking about diet here. We're talking about different types of foods and saturated fats and, cholesterol and whole food carbohydrates and stuff. But even if you do that, if you don't manage the pressure and stress well, that will have an effect. That will still have an effect. So especially on blood pressure. And that's going to cause that sort of endothelial damage. And everything kind of feeds off each other. So I would say those are some of the key markers to run. It's worth getting everything run, like getting a fully complete panel done. And obviously, like I said, if you want more information on this type of thing, just reach out to me, get in my Business Athlete Council. We do this stuff. We troubleshoot. We get the stuff run. You can have someone who knows what they're talking about in your wheelhouse with you to figure this stuff out. But I definitely think methylated B vitamins, B6, B12, folate is very important, paying attention to that. And then I would say, AP-A, which is sort of, the good thing about AP-A is that it's another cholesterol marker, but typically when you focus on ApoB, you also get AP-A down as well. So it's one of those things, like I said, let's pull a couple of big levers to solve multiple problems. Now, when it comes to supplementation, this is where I would say there are some useful tools. I'm a big fan of berberine or dihydroberberine. I like berberine. It's a Chinese herb. I like it because, again, it pulls multiple levers. So berberine in the research has been shown to help with blood glucose stability, so for insulin resistance, but also it helps with lipid profiles, cholesterol. And it has a lot of anti-cancer properties too. And it can potentially help with blood pressure. So it's a very, to me, I've used berberine on a daily basis for years now. I will say some people, their digestion doesn't necessarily tolerate it well, so you do need to test that. Anytime you add something in, you need to test how your digestion, where's your resting heart rate. Sometimes different supplements can affect heart rate, digestion, that type of thing. So you just got to be mindful of that and add one thing in at a time so you can track the variables. If you add 10 things in at once, you have no idea what's working and what's not. So taper and stack things in methodically. I would say there is a good blended product by a brand called Revive MD. So Revive MD has a product called Lipid. And I like that one because it's got a bunch of different things in it. It's got some, red yeast rice extract, some beta-glucans. So beta-glucans, red yeast rice extract, garlic, berberine. But if you're someone that just feels overwhelmed and overloaded with supplement options, getting something like the Revive MD Lipid is a good one because it's got that stack in there so you can simplify down your supplement stack. But I would say that beta-glucans is definitely a good addition. And I would say red yeast rice extract, but get this, garlic. Whole fresh garlic or garlic powdered capsules. Very, very good for overall blood pressure management, heart health, lipid profiles, you name it. So I'd use garlic on a daily basis for that reason. So again, we try to get supplements that are in some ways almost whole food, right? You're not just opting for some type of medication. But I would say those are some of the key things as it relates to cholesterol and lipid management. Now, one of the interesting areas that a lot of people won't know about and they won't really talk about is peptides and bioregulated peptides. So again, I love these because I feel like they're a sort of undiscovered world of efficacy, meaning that they really do work. And Dr. Vladimir Kavinson out of Russia, he had studied bioregulated peptides for decades. And there was a lot of very impressive research in Russia. The reason why it's not talked about here in the US is because the FDA doesn't recognize a lot of that research. And it's the whole pharmaceutical industry in many ways has a vested interest in keeping people silly and not realizing they have options outside of statins and PCSK9 inhibitors and stuff like that. But there are literally peptides. Like, I'll give you some examples. So bioregulated peptides like cardiogen and vasugen and velon, thymogen. So all of these peptides help with either directly on the heart, or they help with reducing down inflammation in your endothelial system and your vascular system. So I think of bioregulators a bit like servicing a vehicle. You don't have to take them all the time long term, but you take them for periods and then you stop, and it kind of reboots the system. So I'll take cardiogen, thymogen, vasugen, and velon, which are bioregulated peptides. I'll take them for about 1 month every 6 months. And what I find, because I've done a split test with this, where I ran my blood work, and because I'm plant-based and I've kind of dialed things in, my stuff's pretty good. At this point now, it's pretty hard to get improvements from where I'm at, but I'm happy with sort of sustaining. But I even noticed that with the inclusion of some of these bioregulators, I still saw more positive trends in the right direction. And then I've obviously had students come through and use these, and I see quite a significant change in them. So I do think bioregulated peptides can be very useful. Outside of bioregulators, there are peptides that you might even know. TB500, or thymosin beta-4, BPC157, and thymosin alpha-1. Very, very effective. I mean, very effective in terms of cellular regeneration, recovery, reductions of inflammation. I will say, go listen to my episode on peptides. There's always things you need to weigh up as it pertains to, like, sort of potential cancer risks. But I will say, for the average person, that's just not founded, and I don't think there is an issue for most people. It's one of those things where it kind of gets hyped up. And if someone has like a massive family history of like severe cancers, you might want to do a little bit of due diligence. But I would say for the average person, strategic peptide use with something like TB500, BPC157, or a blend like Clo or Glow is definitely worth exploring, stacking with bioregulators. So if I was going to give you like an ultimate cheat sheet right now, and by the way, people pay me thousands of dollars to just give you this information, where I would be doing a cycle of TB500 coupled with BPC157, or I'd be using the Clo blend. So Clo is KPV, BPC157, TB500, and GHKCU, so a copper peptide. I'd be doing a microdose of Clo every day. I'd be using cardiogen, thymogen, vasugen, and velon for 1 month every 6 months. I'd be stacking in some dihydroberberine before meals every day. I'd be stacking in garlic powder and or cutting up some whole garlic cloves and consuming that as well. If I really wanted to turbocharge things, I'd probably throw the Revive MD lipid support on top of all that, so I'm not having to take a whole bunch of other stuff. And I know it sounds like a lot, but think of the ROI of you not being dead. Think of the ROI of you not being dead. That's why when people say, oh, it's a lot of stuff, well, would you rather have heart attack? You got to pull your head out of your butt and realize that if you want to perform at the highest level and be a true operator, you got to do what it takes. Now, I'm not saying that you will have to run all those things. You might not be as sensitive as I was. And some people will be okay with doing a bunch of stuff, and that's fine. Other people will want more of a minimalistic approach. That's also fine. Maybe you just lock in the diet and you just use some dihydroberberine. That's better than most people. So I say this because now you've got your supplement protocol. You've got some of the dietary changes. Again, go and listen to my macro bowl concept breakdown. But like I mentioned, the fats, the whole food carbohydrates versus the refined carbohydrates, that type of stuff is just good basic principles. I would say, foods with one ingredient, like I mentioned. Jasmine rice is just jasmine rice. Raspberries are just raspberries. You don't want too much processed stuff that comes in packages with preservatives and stuff. So outside of that, there is obviously physical training, VO2 max training, zone 2, walking, high intensity intervals, things like that, which I'm going to touch on. And then there is sleep optimization, and then obviously stress on the nervous system and stimulants. So first of all, stimulants. I would say in general, if you've got blood pressure issues or your resting heart rate is elevated above your like typical age bracket, you really need to be mindful of your stimulant use. I typically say 200 milligrams of caffeine a day and consume it in the morning about 1 to 2 hours after waking, and that would be the most I would do. I try and keep it down. Now, you might say, well, I just feel tired all the time. I'd be focusing on optimizing mitochondrial health. So your mitochondria are like the batteries of your cells. So I've talked about this in other episodes, where like a mitochondrial reboot stack that I will use is the MOTS peptide, SS31, NAD+, and methylene blue. And I find that quad factor as like a sort of mitochondrial reset can liberate a lot more energy from you than a bunch of stimulants can. I would also say, just dilute down, if you love drinking coffee, just dilute down the concentration of it. Still drink your 4 cups, but dilate the potency of it by 50%. Or maybe do a 50-50 blend where you do 50% coffee, 50% like an adaptogenic mushroom blend, like Rise or Mudwater, right? So try and find a middle ground. This is also why I'm not a fan of Ritalin and Adderall, because those are also stimulants. And in the insulin sensitivity episode that I did, I talk about, and I've done this episode on ADHD, where I said most people don't actually have ADHD. They're insulin resistant. So their brain fog is coming from blood glucose instability, not from some ADHD-driven diagnosis. And so you're actually solving the wrong problem. You're not solving the insulin resistance. You're just adding more stimulants, which is then it affects sleep, it affects anxiety, all this stuff. It's not good. So I would be focusing on removing those things as much as you can. Stimulants will definitely have a negative effect on blood pressure and resting heart rate. By the way, one little side note for you. I don't see this very often, but it can happen that some people, when they use growth hormone releasing peptides like tesamorelin, sometimes you see an increase in resting heart rate. It's very uncommon, but I have seen it in a few of my students. So 2 of my students actually out of all of them. But it's worth to note that it was a real thing. Like they use the tesamorelin, their resting heart rate goes up by like 10 beats per minute. They remove it and it drops back down again. So there was definitely a connection. So I just wanted to mention that. It's not common, but it can happen. Now, I would say in terms of training, VO2 max is a really useful data point to know in terms of how healthy your heart and vascular system is. So you might be able to go to a local gym, and you might be able to find some equipment to do it at home. I don't do this testing myself anymore because I just at the point where I've done so much of the data tracking in my early years that at this point now I just have a very intuitive approach. But I do think for people where this is a concern, it is worth getting these things tested at some point to know what your baseline is. But I would say beyond that, zone 2 cardio. So if you just go to ChatGPT and type in how to figure out my heart rate for zone 2 cardio, it's going to give you a nice little algorithm based on your age. And if you wanted to track that, that's what I'd be focusing on. Typically, like, 70 minutes, I think, a week. I'd just be doing 20 minutes a day if you can. What I do is I stack it into my workflow. This is the difference between a normal person and a business athlete. So I have an air bike in my gym setup here with my walking pad and my standing desk. While I'm doing this podcast interview, for example, I am doing walking on my walking pad. When I want to get a little bit of an energy boost, I'll jump on my air bike for 5 or 10 minutes and just kind of pump the system. While I'm on the air bike, I'll send voice notes to students. I'll do voice to text to my ChatGPT thread. It cleans it up for me, and I copy that, and I send things off as emails. So I'm actually sending emails and sending sales conversations and sending consulting protocols while I'm on the air bike, getting some VO2 max zone 2 stuff done and sending out workload. This is the difference. I don't work my fitness around my occupation and job. I work my occupation and job around this lifestyle. You need to reconfigure the whole thing. So for any of you guys that are serious about this, have a walking pad and a standing desk in your office, and I would even get an air bike or a Peloton bike in there as well. I know it sounds crazy, but I promise you, this is the difference between like true pros, the true business athletes, and just the average person who struggles. So which one do you want to be? You get to choose. But in fact, what I was going to say was the zone 2 is about 150 to 300 minutes per week. Now, that might sound like a lot, but if you're doing a nice brisk walk each day and you're stacking it into your routine, you can absolutely chip away at that. You've got to find ways to, remember this quote, eat an apple a day, not 7 on Sunday. That's people's problem. They'll sit on their butt all day, do absolutely nothing, get to the end of the day, realize they've only done 4,000 steps, and then panic and fret and try and power walk for 2 hours to get to 10,000. It's silly. Don't do that. I always say 30 and 30. So in the first 30 minutes of waking, walk on your walking pad for 30 minutes. And then if you can walk while you're working, do it, because you'll easily hit your zone 2 requirements when you just increase that walking a little bit. And especially if you throw little bursts of air bike or Peloton in there as like little exercise snacks, I call it priming the pump. So as I go through the day, rather than letting my energy dip and my oxygen saturation deplete, I will prime the pump and just do like 5 to 10 minutes on the bike to charge myself up. I'll still use that time to work or consume some podcasts and education. But this way, I'm not having to add this stuff in on top of my busy routine. I'm actually weaving it into my routine. Now, one little tool for you that I think is useful, you might be saying, well, what about VO2 max? Typically, it's just like high intensity stuff. So you could either jump on an air bike or a Peloton and do little 30-second bursts where you're pushing yourself, as hard as you can. Or one thing that I like to do that I think is useful for you to consider is if you're doing some resistance training, just throw a set of kettlebell swings off the back end of any exercises you're doing. So let's say you're doing a bicep curl. Throw a set of kettlebell swings off the back end of it. You're doing some chest press. Throw a set of kettlebell swings off the back end of it. And just by throwing these little bursts of kettlebell swings off, you sort of chip away at that total. So you can either do that, or if you don't want to necessarily do more weight-related stuff, that's where I'd be just doing these little prime the pump bursts through the day. And I say this because, again, the true business athletes in 2026, they just operate differently. They are not that guy who's driving around in his flash car but sits on his butt all day on the phone, sedentary, who might train hard in the morning, but that's it, right? Like, you're not going to get amazing results that way. I can tell you now. And so you've got to say to yourself, like, do I want really profound results or do I not? I will choose. So I would say in general, Zone 2, 150 minutes as a baseline. Basically pepper it through your day. Break it down through your day in bursts. If you can get a walking pad, do it. Get a Peloton or air bike, do it. 1 to 2 sessions of that per week. But obviously, I would break it up over the whole week. I'd do a little bit every day. I think that's more manageable. But you can do it in 1 or 2 sessions if you want. I would say the next part of that is just regular weight training. When you push hard with your weight training, you'll notice that your heart rate spikes. That's actually a good thing. It's called hormetic stress or hormesis. So like I've talked about before, a short exposure burst of stress actually causes long-term physiological strength. So that's where, like cold plunge or sauna can create that hormetic effect. And by the way, heart health with sauna and cold plunge, very, very useful, especially sauna. I would be saying 5 sessions, 20 minutes a session if you can. If you have the funds in the room, get a sauna at home. It's a very, very useful tool for blood pressure and heart health and cancer as well. So again, you can see there's things outside of just diet or outside. You don't just have to use peptides. You've got a lot of things in the arsenal. I would definitely say one of the biggest drivers is going to be your sleep. It's going to be your sleep. I've done episodes and I talk about this a lot. So you've really got to go and listen to all my episodes because I discuss this stuff in detail. Like I talk about the 4 sensory systems in the body. Your visual cortex, your auditory system, your olfactory or your sense of smell, and your tactile, which is like your touch skin. And when you can lock in and dial protocols in around these different sensory systems, you really calm down your nervous system. So you get into a nice deep state of REM and deep sleep. Remember, it's not just the amount of time you spend in bed, it's your REM and deep sleep that matter the most. And so go listen to that episode where I talk about that because your sleep will have a big effect on blood pressure, insulin resistance, and all the sort of inflammatory markers in the body. Think of sleep a bit like a metabolic inflammatory reset. When you can dial your sleep in more, you'll just reduce inflammation in your body so much more. Now, the last part of this, I would say in general, is just your stress and your nervous system. And in fact, like I said, go listen to episode 15 because I talked all about chronic stress on your health and how it affects your central nervous system. And I talked about the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic, two sides of your autonomic nervous system. And what you'll find is that a lot of stimulants, a lot of just high-paced living, poor sleep, that go, hustle, grind culture, that's very sympathetic dominant. That will typically drive up all the inflammatory markers as it relates to heart health. Opposite's true for parasympathetic tone. So that's that rest and digest side of your nervous system. So slow, controlled nasal breathing, getting light exposure outside 1 to 2 times a day for 5 to 20 minutes. I do 5 to 20 minutes multiple times per day. I think of light and sunlight and natural light as like a multivitamin for your mitochondria. And that helps with inflammation across the board. I would say in general, sleep and stress management are two very important parts of the equation that I would encourage you to get into a tribe or a group where people focus on these things. Again, that's why I focus so much on my Business Athlete Council, because I realize that transformation is not just you eating a bunch of broccoli sprouts and doing some yoga. It's more than that. Like, you've got to reconfigure your lifestyle. You've got to learn how to set boundaries. You've got to reorganize the structure of your workflow. You've got to be someone who goes from sitting on his butt all day to being on a walking pad. The walking pad will help with pumping lymphatic system and oxygen through your body, and that helps with delivery of nutrients to all your different cells. And when you get better nutrient uptake, inflammation goes down because your body's getting everything that it needs. You don't have that metabolic drag that's energetically weighing you down. Right? And remember, walking improves nitric oxide production. So things like beets and beet juice powder also help with nitric oxide production. But walking is very good, and nitric oxide basically helps with vasodilation. It opens up your arteries and blood vessels. The bigger and more open up they are, the more flow they get. It's less of that molasses difficulty to pump. We don't want that. We don't want that. The other thing I would say, just to kind of wrap up this thought, is that on one hand, training is good. Remember, I've talked about the stress bucket, where if you add in a lot of different stress variables, and then say, for example, you're like not sleeping well and you've been getting sick and you're financially stressed, and then you're training really, really hard too, that intensity can actually work against you. So sometimes it's either you don't do enough, so you skip workouts, you're not pushing yourself with that hormetic effect, that hormesis, and equally you're doing too much. Classic example is someone who just overdoes 75 hard, and they just torch themselves, and their nervous system is so fried from all just like the overtraining and under-recovering. So I would say in general, you've got to lock in a regular sleep-wake cycle. You've got to get outside 2 times a day or more and walk. I'd be peppering walking in throughout the day, 12 to 15,000 steps. You've got to focus on your breathing. Deep, controlled nasal breathing is key. You've got to learn how to set boundaries with people and manage your time effectively. And then stack in these principles around supplements, around peptides and bioregulators, around training. You do these things, and I promise you, it's going to change the game for you. And then you can look at things like your heart rate variability and your resting heart rate and your blood pressure, which are good markers on a day-to-day basis, coupled with REM and deep sleep to tell you how much strain your system is under, which is basically how much inflammation is happening in your body. And then you go get your blood work run, and you get it consistently over the next few months, and you get ApoB tested and C-reactive protein. And if you see trends in the right direction, you're like, this is working. This is actually working. And let me add in another tactic. Let me add in another tip. And you can continue to progress. And I tell you this, you may not necessarily feel an obvious difference right away, but this is the stuff that's going to extend your lifespan so you don't end up in the grave all because you wanted to just have a successful business. There's more to it than that. I know it sounds cliche. Everyone wants to be successful, but it cannot come at the expense of your health. I've seen too many guys that are like all in business, but they're big, fat, and swollen and puffy. And they talk about, just keep going and just like never stop. They can't sit with themselves quietly for a minute. You can tell they make themselves anxious. All that blood pressure stuff, all that inflammatory response in the body, that's going to be causing a lot of heart issues. And you can get away with that when you're in your 20s and 30s. It's going to come and bite you in your 40s and 50s if you don't lock it in. But the good thing is that you can absolutely heal and reverse a lot of these issues, a lot of them. I've seen people who have had pretty significant issues with their health, heart attacks, strokes, or like a lot of arterial plaque buildup in their CAC scans, and absolutely turn things around. Get off blood pressure medications, get off statins, get off all the medications, and improve their energy, see their blood pressure drop, see their heart rate variability increase, meaning it's just like a marker of like resilience of your heart, how resilient your heart system is. Their resting heart rate goes down, all because they added in like the walking and all the different things I talk about. So I know we covered a lot of different things. This is a deep topic, and there is a lot of different mechanisms at play. I know it can be overwhelming, but I want you to recognize again this. And when I say get in my Business Athlete Council or just get into my Anomaly Project course or whatever, I'm just telling you this because most people that just take this information in, it's so overwhelming. They try and bootstrap something for a minute and they just burn out because they don't do an effective job of integrating the systems in well, or they don't understand their own context. They're like, oh yeah, I understand, Fraser, you're talking about, certain foods might be good or not good for me based on my blood work, but you don't have the frame of reference to even determine that sometimes. When you get that clear roadmap, everything gets easier. But I leave you with this notion. This stuff, this is what's going to be like a health insurance policy for you. I do not want you to be another statistic like so many people out there. Because I think to myself, if I was to die now, it would break my heart for my children. It would break my heart. And that's why I have such a vested interest in optimizing this part of the body, and especially for you, because I can imagine the pain and the suffering that they would go through if they lost you. And beyond that, you push hard because you want to live this meaningful, powerful, successful life. Your rate limiting factor is your energy. It's your ability to withstand pressure and stress. And these concepts that I talked about today are a key driving force behind that. So go out there today, guys. Focus on these systems. It's not sexy. People want to talk about abs and fat loss. They don't want to talk about heart health. And that's why their results suck. And that's why you are a business athlete and you are here. And it's why you are one of the 1%ers.